with EEA, and I'm just going to cover a few logistics before we start. We are offering interpretation for this webinar. We have Portuguese, Spanish, and Cantonese. So if you click on the bottom of your panel, there is an interpretation button, and you can select the language to go into that channel to have interpretation. We hopefully will be offering Haitian Creole as well. So that might pop up partway through the webinar. We can go to the next slide. So we are recording this webinar. We will be posting the presentation online at the mass.gov/2030 CECP website after we have concluded. We will be keeping all lines muted during the presentation portion, but we will be opening the lines for oral comments after the presentation. We will explain that process when we get there, but thank you for everyone who has already indicated that you want to provide comment. We have a lot of folks, so we will be moving swiftly through them. And if you have any questions or clarifying issues, please use the chat function, and the various folks on the line will try to address those during the webinar. But with that, I'd like to introduce Judy Chang, who's Undersecretary of Energy for the state of Massachusetts. Thanks, Judy.
Great, thank you, Claire. My name is Judy Chang, the Undersecretary of Energy, and I very much welcome everybody's participation. So first of all, thank you for joining on this webinar and your patience with the scheduling of this particular webinar, the date and the time. We did delay it for a few weeks, and hopefully that gave you some additional time to review and process the Interim 2030 plan released on December 30th last year. I note that the chat function seems to be working, and while it's there available for communication, I just urge everyone to be respectful and to be thoughtful in your question. And also, I want to make sure this is as much of a opportunity to hear your comments as well. So we probably have more people signed up to speak than the time allows. So we will try to fit as many people as possible. And I will give sort of more instructions when we get to that. So I will begin by making the first part of this webinar a more of a conversation and description of what's in the CECP. Okay, I will first summarize our approach and strategies for aggressively reducing greenhouse gas emissions during this next decade, positioning Massachusetts to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And then I will listen to oral comments that you may have on the plan. Like I said, we received many requests to comment, so it's possible that we won't be able to get everybody on this today, but we certainly welcome your written comments to the CECP as well, and we'll talk more about the scheduling of that. The last decade, and especially the last few years, has been an exciting time for Massachusetts as we continue to make significant progress in safeguarding our environmental resources and taking aggressive action on climate change while preparing ourselves for the impact of our communities by adaptation. Massachusetts has always been a leader in environmental responsibility and governance, and I'm very proud to be part of this team and part of the efforts that we're taking on. Before the pandemic disrupted our schedule, our lives, 2020 was really a good start. We started the decade with Governor Baker setting an aggressive target for Massachusetts to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. This target is consistent with where the science says we need to be. But there's no doubt that it is an ambitious target. And we know it will need, to achieve this goal, we need all the tools in our toolbox. And it's not going to be just a breeze or easy. We will need to set policies, and we will be setting programs and working with all of our stakeholders to make the transition as easy as possible and as cost effectively as possible. This is why EEA, my agency, has engaged in a comprehensive science-based roadmap process so that we can map out the potential pathways available to us to achieve this climate goal. Next slide, please. I want to bring up the roadmap because the roadmap study is I'll say longer term. It's a 2050 study. So we mapped out different scenarios to achieve a net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And the reason this is important and relevant in the context of the Clean Energy Climate Plan is it gave us a vision of the longer term. We usually do these kind of analysis, not just a decade by decade, but actually a longer term trajectory of how we might need to, what we need to do to achieve the longer term goal, and then set targets for the near term. Our ability to solve the climate crisis requires bold and urgent leadership. We know that the cost of inaction will be devastating for our economy, our health, and our environment, which is why the Commonwealth is taking a leadership role as the first state in the nation to release this comprehensive study to achieve the net zero mission by 2050. It is a very comprehensive economy-wide study. The picture here is the cover page of that study. We took 2 years of technical analysis using the best models and analytical tools available to explore in detail what steps the Commonwealth and the region need to take to achieve our goal of net zero GHG emissions by 2050, while maintaining a healthy, equitable, and thriving economy in Massachusetts. And while it's difficult to present and also see the chat, I will talk a little bit about what net zero means as we go forward. This long-range analysis is informing our effort for the next decade. That's why I want to bring up here that the decarbonization roadmap is actually relevant in understanding what we need to do in the next decade through 2030. A 2030 limit that maximizes our ability to achieve net zero and the policies and other things we need to achieve in this next decade to enable sustained and continual reduction of emission for the next 30 years. So really we see this as a roadmap, the next 30 years, at least 30 years to achieve the net zero, whereas we're setting policies in the more immediate terms for the next 10 years. If you haven't already, I really encourage you to review the roadmap report. It is not only a very comprehensive analytical piece of work, it's also very informative. So if you want to learn more about how we think about various different sectors, energy supply, transportation, buildings, industry, land use, etc., this is a very comprehensive, and a ton of people have put in a lot of great work in pulling that study together. Next slide, please. I want to just give you a glimpse of what this means. The 2050 roadmap have a few key findings. While we looked at different scenarios of how to achieve a net zero by 2050, under different scenarios or under different pathways, we have observed common elements. And these common elements are a balanced clean energy portfolio anchored by significant amount of offshore wind resources, not the only clean energy resource, but one of the most significant new resources that the region will need. More interstate transmission that will allow us to access diverse renewable generation in our region, around the states around Massachusetts, as well as in Canada. Widespread electrification of transportation and building heat, and reducing costs by replacing energy infrastructure when it is up for replacement. And this is an important feature or understanding of how we achieve decarbonization, because it's much cheaper to transition when individuals must make a change anyway, when our cars are at their end of life and we're in the market for a new car, that's the best time to change our purchasing decision as opposed to forcing anyone to change when the existing tools or existing equipment or existing appliances are still working. The modeling and the assumption in the 2050 roadmap were mostly built off a pre-COVID understanding of the trends and dynamics. So some might ask, have we considered the dramatic change, the way we work and we live under COVID? We primarily looked at long-term trends. So we were using assumptions or depictions of how we live our lives in a pre-COVID situation. Certainly if this whole pandemic has lasting effect on how we work, how much transportation we use, and even building retrofits, we could in the future update those kind of analysis as we witness the lasting features of the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So now I move to the 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan. To put us in the best position to achieve the net zero by 2050, the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs had set an emissions limit of 45% below the 1990 levels by 2030, which strikes the right balance because it sets us on the best course to hit our net zero goal by 2050 while balancing the economic costs. This target is as ambitious as any state emissions targets have been, and it allows us to take advantage of this end-of-life stock turnover that I just discussed to the point where like a furnace or a car is worn out and needs to be replaced. This will help us make the emissions reduction we need while keeping costs low. It also allows us the time and flexibility to develop new markets and take advantage of the technology breakthrough and innovations that we're working on today. If we're going to meet our ambitious climate goal and achieve net zero by 2050, then this is the decade of action. I think it's really important to understand that this is not something we can wait until 2040 to take on because 2050 sounds so far away. This is we actually need to act now. In fact, one thing that's quite enlightening conducting this analysis and following all the experts have been putting their work into this analysis is that we really need to act now to set us on the path to achieving that net zero. We actually can't wait until the future and hope that certain technology breakthrough will sort of get us there without doing anything in the first decade. So our 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan outlines the critical steps that we need to take over the next 10 years to position the state to achieve the long-term goals. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide presents a summary of a few key policies. As you can see here, to meet our ambitious 2030 goal and position our state to achieve net zero by 2050, we need to make significant progress in the next decade. We will need to retrofit over 1 million homes, support highly efficient new construction, and help people adopt clean heating solutions like various different heat pump technologies already available on the market. We will need to put over 750,000 new zero-emission vehicles, like electric vehicles, on the road and achieve a 15% reduction in commuting vehicle miles traveled. We will need to build and interconnect about 6,000 megawatts of clean energy, new clean energy, and modernize our electricity grid to support the development of these clean energy resources. The 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan establishes the blueprint for achieving these goals equitably and affordably. Certainly that is our goal, and we're going to set policies to make sure that's at the center of what we try to achieve or what we achieve in the next decade. Next slide, please. So in the next 3 to 5 slides, I'm going to cover several of the sectors in a little more detail. For the building sector, the 2030 plan outlines bold actions to pivot the Commonwealth building sector to high efficiency buildings and clean heat. During this year, Massachusetts will create a new net zero high performance stretch building energy code to ensure our newest buildings are resilient and energy efficient. Communities can adopt the stretch energy code starting next year, with the code becoming mandatory and effective statewide by the start of 2028. This is really important because one of the things that you can imagine is that when we build new buildings, we should do it right the first time. And to do that, it's not only the fuels we need or we use to heat the buildings, it's also just the envelope around the buildings and how our new buildings can really outperform the existing ones. I have recently visited a new a building under construction that's built to the Passive House code. It's actually really impressive. What they can do with current technology is to really strengthen the envelope around the building to significantly reduce the energy consumption necessary to heat the building and to cool the building. In the process, the building is also more resilient. And so if you haven't had a chance to observe what building developers and architects can do today with existing technology, I really urge you to see one of these high-performing buildings being built. About 80% of the buildings we'll have in 2050 are already standing today. That means we're not actually one of those states or regions that's building a lot of brand new buildings. So really, the 2030 plan is also taking bold actions on existing buildings. And this is important, but very difficult. The Commonwealth will pivot the Mass Save program, which is a joint program from all the electric and gas utilities, first limiting fossil fuel heating system incentives in the next 3-year plan for 2022 to 2024, and then ending all fossil fuel heating system incentives by the end of 2024. The idea here is we really want to phase out, or we want to reduce any more incentives to build new fossil-based heating systems. I'm personally working to understand the potential barriers to encourage the changes that we need to adopt cleaner ways to heat our buildings and businesses. We will also expand access to energy efficiency and clean heating for low and moderate income renters and homeowners in environmental justice communities through targeted community-based incentives and outreach programs. While the 2030 plan mentions only air source heat pump, but what we really mean is all really available technology to help us heat our buildings by transitioning from burning fossil emitting greenhouse gas to electrifying, heating our buildings. In addition to these measures to decarbonize existing buildings, we have a plan forward to cap and reduce emissions in the building sector in general. We will convene a governor's commission on clean heat paired with interagency clean heat task force. This work will build on the Department of Public Utilities study to assess the role of gas utilities and ensure a low carbon future and explore strategies that enable the Commonwealth to achieve net zero emissions while safeguarding ratepayers' interests and secure safe, reliable, and affordable natural gas service. By the end of 2021, the Commission and the Task Force on Clean Heat will recommend a framework for a long-term declining emissions cap for heating fuels used in the state. And by the end of next year, end of 2022, we will recommend statutory, regulatory, and financing mechanisms that's needed to ensure that we will continue to have clean heat solution for the buildings in the state. Next slide, please. In the transportation sector, the Transportation and Climate Initiative Program, or TCIP, is central to our strategy. The TCIP is a multi-state cap and in a multi-state program that will reduce motor vehicle pollution by at least 26% and generate over 1.8 billion in Massachusetts by 2032, which is 12 years out, to invest in equitable, cleaner transportation options. But we will need this kind of revenue to help fund the programs that's necessary to, again, help achieve the transition from large gasoline and diesel-fueled transportation systems to cleaner or zero-emitting vehicles. The program will require large gasoline and diesel fuel suppliers to purchase allowances for the pollution that results from the combustion of fuels they sell in the region. And then the revenues from the sale of those emissions allowance will be invested in clean transportation options, providing us funding resource or funding source for increasing zero-emission vehicles and expanding the electric vehicle charging infrastructure that we need in the state. No less than 35% of the proceeds are dedicated, will be dedicated, 35% of the proceeds from the auction of the allowances will be dedicated to ensure that overburdened or underserved communities benefit equitably from clean transportation projects and programs. As the TCIP gets started and given potential changes in the federal and regional transportation initiatives, we will closely monitor the funding needs to support programs that achieve our 2030 emissions limit and beyond. In addition to that, Massachusetts will join California in mandating that by 2035, 100% of our new light-duty vehicles sold in the Commonwealth will be zero-emissions vehicles. For medium and heavy-duty vehicles, we join with 15 other jurisdictions in a coordinated effort to have 30% of all new trucks and buses sold in Massachusetts be zero-emission vehicles by 2030, increasing to 100% of the sales by 2050. We will continue to incentivize the purchase of new zero-emission vehicles, both light-duty and heavy-duty, through state rebates and incentive programs, and support the continued build-out of robust, smart statewide charging infrastructure to ensure we address concerns about range anxiety throughout the state. To reduce harmful air pollutants from diesel-powered vehicles, the Commonwealth would work with neighboring states to develop and implement a regional low-carbon fuel standard by 2026. While electrifying our vehicles and decarbonizing our transportation fuels are important strategies, we will also pursue strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, including strengthening incentives and opportunities to lock in a permanent reduction in the number of vehicle miles traveled annually by commuters and statewide. And this is where I think we can learn from what we observe through the pandemic and what opportunities businesses might have in reducing commuters traveling in their own vehicles. The Commonwealth will also continue to encourage and incentivize a broad range of smart growth policies, which encourages fewer and shorter motor vehicle trips, prioritizing development near public transit, and enable the use of alternative zero carbon mobility options like walking and biking. Next slide, please. On the energy system side, we will need to ensure that our landmark nation-leading clean energy and clean transmission procurement including 3.2 gigawatt of offshore wind, 1 gigawatt of hydropower, and 3.2 gigawatt of smart solar program come online, as those will be essential in achieving our 2030 limits. This is not an easy task. While we at the state can lay out the work and continue to procure the clean energy resources that the state will need, the siting, the connecting, and really integrating them with other resources is a much larger effort. That's a regional effort. So we're also working with our regional partners to making sure that the things that we buy and the things that we procure and the things that we motivate and try to build will actually come to fruition. We're also facilitating a path to market an additional 2 gigawatt of distributed clean energy generation between 2025 and 2030, and another 6 gigawatt of offshore wind in Massachusetts beyond 2030, so 2030 and 2040. We will continue to lead the multi-state effort. Governor Baker, joined by other governors in the region, had realigned and working with our system operators and system planners to account for the need for clean energy resources in our wholesale regional electricity markets and systems. While we received many comments and questions about the accounting and assumptions for electricity generation, this plan, the 2030 plan, as well as the 2050 roadmap, is built upon the accounting methodology and emissions rate from the Mass DEP greenhouse gas inventory. We do expect to update that inventory in the next 2 years as we adjust the calculations according to the best science and best methodology to ensure that we meet the 2030 limits. Next slide, please. Since the interim 2030 plan was published on December 30th, a lot has happened at the federal level. We expect to update the discussion around the federal actions in the 2030 plan, including the passage of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, that enacts a phase down of HFCs. HFCs are potent climate pollutants commonly used as coolants in air conditioners and refrigerators. We will be implementing a regulation to limit the sale of HFCs in the Commonwealth and to support policies at the federal level like the AIM Act that further curb the emissions from highly potent climate pollutants. We will also work with agencies across the state to ensure best practices are in place around waste, wastewater, and agricultural emissions. Next slide, please. The land sector analysis from our 2050 roadmap study indicates that our trees and vegetation are sequestering about 5 million metric ton of carbon dioxide each year, which combined with the 45% in gross emissions will contribute toward Massachusetts reaching the net zero emissions by 2050. And some of you have asked, the gross emissions is the total emissions from all of our activities without factoring carbon sequestration. So net emissions includes or considers the net sequestering of the carbon emissions. In the next 2 years, we will update the state GHG emissions inventory to support and track carbon sequestration. As part of the new effort to align the emissions accounting with the net zero by 2050 target, we will be taking on that work as well. Massachusetts has a good track record of protecting our natural and working lands, including an innovative urban tree planting program in our gateway cities. Massachusetts Resilient Lands Initiative and Healthy Soil Action Plan include best land management practices that the Commonwealth will be implementing in the coming years to protect ecosystem health and enhance carbon sequestration. Massachusetts is also collaborating with our neighboring states to incentivize the regional use of harvested wood in long-lived products such as cross-laminated timber and wood-based building insulation, which help harvested carbon remain stored and support the local and regional economy. Now, our natural and working lands alone will not be enough to help the Commonwealth reach net zero by 2050. So we will convene an interagency task force on carbon sequestration to advise on the development of an accounting framework and a carbon sequestration market framework by 2025. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of the current timeline. there will be another webinar like this on the evening of the 15th, next Monday. The public comment period closes on the 22nd of this month. So, we will listen to comments provided here today. For those that we can't fit into a public, oral comment, we highly encourage you to submit your comments through the written comments process. We will then review the public comments provided, and our plan is to release a finalized document at the end of April. That, of course, depends on the comments we receive and how we will address them in finalizing the CECP. So I see many questions in the chat. Perhaps what I will do is open it up for public comments, because I want to make sure that we can accommodate as many people as we can. And then if there are certain questions that I can answer, I will jump back on and try to answer, if not all, but some of your questions. So thank you very much for joining today to talk about this plan and to hear each other's comments on this study. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Judy. So I'm gonna help facilitate the oral comments. So thank you for those who have registered to the Zoom webinar and indicated that you will be providing comments. We have about 30, which is a lot, and we have some hands here raised. So in terms of fairness, I'll start off with those who noted in the registration first, and then we'll go through that list. And then for those who are part of that group and who have their hand raised, you can, I guess, lower your hands when I get to you. And then for anyone who remains with their hand raised afterwards, we'll try to get to you as quickly as possible. So with that said, do we have Adam Lupino on? You're on this list to submit comments. Provide all comments. One second. I'm going to allow Adam. Go ahead, Adam. Can you? I am unmuting you, but for some reason, I still see you muted. I'm going to give it another 5 seconds. All right, Adam, we'll get back to you. So why don't I go to Stacy Rubin from CLF. Go ahead, Stacy, I can hear you. At least I can hear your microphone.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. This is Stacy Rubin at Conservation Law Foundation. I'll be brief to make sure other people have a chance to speak. But our goal is to make sure that all of the clean energy and climate plan strategies are centered in equity and justice, and that they be respectfully developed and deployed with the input and leadership and engagement from the communities who are most impacted. As a result, we'd love to see in the final version of the plan more information about how EEA is going to engage the public and those most harmed by potential policies and those who could most benefit in developing the strategies. And we also want to make sure that EEA uses the final plan to meet its obligations under the Global Warming Solutions Act, as well as the existing laws and policies that ensure we can meet environmental justice and other equity considerations. Just two main points that I want to cover on the sectors. Regarding public transit, we would love to see a particular strategy in the transportation section of the plan that talks about maintaining and expanding public transit, as well as moving toward the electrification of bus fleets and rail. And that will make sure that we have consistent messages from EEA along with the MBTA and other secretariats within the Commonwealth. And then secondly, I want to just talk about for the building sector, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan relies heavily on heat pumps to reach its goals. We want to make sure that the 3-year energy efficiency plan is really making sure that we're phasing out the incentives for any fossil fuel conversions. And we need to make sure that the final plan demonstrates how we're going to achieve the annual level of heat pumps that are needed. And we need to make sure that there is sufficient money that's devoted to the deep energy retrofit programs, especially with money for low and moderate income, and as well as environmental justice community members. Thank you so much for doing this webinar and all that you are doing.
Thank you, Stacy. Next up is John Bueno Payne. I've asked you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, John.
Hi. I was hoping you'd call me a little later. I'm actually on the road, but I do have some comments. First of all, just so everybody knows, I'm a representative of the United Steelworkers Union, and we represent probably about 2,000 gas workers, employees who work for gas companies in the state of Massachusetts. We're very concerned about the impact to not only our members, but all the employees who currently make their living, either working for a gas utility company or work for a company that depends on natural gas as a fuel source. We're talking thousands of people, and I didn't really see anything in the CECP or even the roadmap that really addressed the level of concern that people have, people who are employed in this industry throughout the state. I know that there's current legislation right now that's pending. There's language in that. It's completely inadequate. It doesn't even come close, not even close, to addressing a potential impact from an energy transition away from natural gas. So I really hope that the people who are spending a lot of time putting these plans together, putting the roadmaps together, really carve out some time and start putting some real plans about how that would get addressed if all the goals in these plans on transition are followed through on, because it's very important, and it's something that, again, it's going to impact a lot of people, and it could be a lot of the same people that fall into the category of injustice communities also. So it has to be done. I could probably spend a lot of more time talking about stretch codes and how we think that isn't the most productive way to get to where we want to be. I know people have said that they don't want to see people in a place where they're making a purchase decision that's a forced transition. Something like a stretch code, in my opinion, could potentially absolutely be a forced transition that could wind up costing a homeowner thousands of dollars to convert to something like an air source heat pump. So I know that's in the pending legislation also. I really hope people are considering stretch codes and some of these goals as they look towards the future. And I'll be making some more written comments at some point, but I wanted to make sure I did that today. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, John. Next up, we're going to go to Richard Fennelly. I see both your hands raised, and you also did pre-register. I've asked you to unmute. Can you?
Yes, thank you
Great.
very much. The roadmap contains a mention of HFC refrigerant replacement, which is great for cooling equipment, AC and refrigeration. I've sent in some comments. You should really look at preventative maintenance of currently deployed refrigeration and AC. On the refrigeration side, commercial refrigeration is in horrible shape. The things that I'm talking about encompass heat transfer coil cleaning, filter replacement, etc. I sent in a study that indicates that what I'm pitching might be an additional 40% emissions reduction benefit at the power plants as compared to HFC refrigerant replacement, which is a direct emissions reduction strategy. So maintenance is critical for cooling equipment, and it's widely ignored by everybody, including the energy efficiency community. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Richard. Next up, we're going to go to Doug Pope. I've asked you to unmute.
Yes, thank you. I was particularly encouraged by Secretary Chang's comments. One of the issues that I see is a rather large one. In 2018, DOER instituted the green subtractor, and they doubled down on that by making solar projects that wanted to be installed in a treed area to make them uneconomic. In 2020, EEA, without a public hearing, took the additional step of restricting solar development, only solar development in core habitat, critical landscape, and biomap 2 areas, which those are 24% of the state, 34% of the state, and 40% of the state. And the state has no control over the other 30,000 lots, according to your calculations, of 12 to 15 acres in size from any kind of development, residential, commercial, or whatever. The states are in all the states in ISO New England are in the same avian and insect migratory pathways. The 230 roadmap, taken together with the 250 roadmap, specifically excludes, to a large extent, large solar development in Massachusetts and thrusts that development on other states. Massachusetts is doing wind, so you other states, you're going to do solar. Great emphasis is placed in the roadmap on energy, regional energy partnerships. Well, what are the other states going to think about having to take their core habitat, critical landscape, and equivalent bio2 map areas and devote those areas to solar development when they find out that Massachusetts wants to keep their state pristine while foisting Massachusetts compliant obligations on them? What will their voters' environmental groups think about that energy policy dichotomy? How will that dichotomy help the regional partnership Northeast to Quebec and New Brunswick discussions? And I think that's we should be installing solar in Massachusetts and providing mitigation as opposed to prohibition. There are active mitigation measures, and I've had that before my previous smart comments. If it takes 2 years for DOER to enact a solar policy, so they really need to start now. If the undersecretary is serious about 500 megawatts a year, we really need to start now, because the national grid will be uneconomic with the declining block. And the national grid will again be out of capacity on this time on an economic basis.
Brian, yeah, sorry, I apologize. Can you conclude? If you have
that's it. I have other stuff, but I could continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry, Doug, excuse me. The next person up is Brian. Brian Campbell, I'm allowing you to unmute. I will try one more time. Brian, can you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry.
Great. I can
I'm
hear you
sorry.
now.
I unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Brian.
My name is Brian, and I'm going to base my comments off electricitymap.org. If you go to that website, just all you have to do is Google electricitymap.org and go to Canada and go to Ontario Regional Transmission Organization. We here in New England are ISO New England. You compare those two emissions per kilowatt hour, and it's right now about 50 grams of carbon compared to about 230 in Massachusetts. The reason why the emissions are low in Ontario is because they have about 10 gigawatts of nuclear power. They have their own designed CANDU reactors, which they're currently building right now in Canada, which would be very easy, relatively easy to buy and install in Massachusetts. And if we want to really consider about reducing emissions, the way to go is not expensive. The most expensive energy there is offshore wind. They're going to be getting 7 cents a kilowatt hour. If we had given Pilgrim that 7 cents a kilowatt hour, it could have generated easily and maintained that safe facility until 2032. It's absolutely insane. That was 62% of our clean energy gone in 2019. But I noticed in September of 2019, Unit 3 at the canal plant of about 300 megawatts came online. Now that's about half the power of Pilgrim, but that's dirty energy. And there you go. You replaced clean energy with dirty. And then we have the problems that happened down in Texas. Well, they ran out of gas because they diverted their gas to heat. So, and plus 93% of their wind energy did not generate. It was frozen. So we're going to go to wind energy as being a backbone. Well, it's unreliable. It needs 100% gas backup. Where are we going to build the gas pipelines in this state? That's my big question, because nobody wants it. And again, and now we're going to be getting power from Canada, Hydro Quebec. Well, to me, that's unreliable too, because New York is going to be getting that power too. And all that's going to do is just if there's a crisis and Quebec needs that power, we're going to be at the end of the line. And we're also canceling Indian Point nuclear plant in New York. That's
Brian?
2 gigawatts. 2 gigawatts. Once we get rid of that, that's going to mean that New York's going to have gas.
Brian, I would like to ask you to conclude if you can.
Well, in the 2050 plan, it says that backbone is going to be wind offshore. It's expensive, extremely expensive. That's not going to work. We're going to be back here in 2030, and we're going to never make this 45%. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. We're going to go to Susan Clark now. I see your hand raised and you also pre-registered. I'm asking you to unmute.
Thank you. And I don't know how my name got to be Susan Clark, because it's Jeff Clark. But anyway, so I appreciate the Secretary mentioned a little bit earlier, we're talking about transportation policies and TCI program that, they're going to evaluate how much revenue it can generate in order to invest in all the various things we need to do, zero energy vehicle incentives, charging station incentives, mass transit, electrifying buses, et cetera. But I mean, I just have taken a quick look at, based on the decarbonization roadmap and the transportation figures and what's required. And it seems to me that TCI starts to not be able to meet the needs of those types of programs somewhere halfway in the decade. So I think the time is really now to think about what the other sources of revenue to supply those programs, because I think that this really, the electrifying the transportation sector is just such a heavy lift. It's just, same thing like some of the other issues we're talking about that's going to require, government incentives and investments in programs. And so I would encourage us to think of, or encourage you to think about in the CECP, how we lay down at least the ideas of what other sources of revenue for those types of programs, and to make sure that we're not doing things at the last minute, like putting in regressive gas taxes and other things that put more of a burden on on the lower income brackets. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to return back to Adam Lupito. Can you unmute?
Thank you.
Great.
Hi, Adam Lupino with the, I'm Director of Policy for the Laborers International Union of North America on behalf of our Massachusetts and Northern New England Laborers District Council and our over 20,000 members in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We want to just make some brief comments that, obviously this transition, this roadmap, the shift away from fossil fuels, a lot has been made about some of the kind of macro level economic impacts to jobs, but I think we really need to pay attention to the wages and benefits that are consistently over generations paid in the fossil fuel industry, both in the transmission, distribution, and power plant construction world versus today's renewable sector. With the exception of offshore wind has been a true model of a just transition where you see the same level of wages and benefits that you would see on a fossil fuel job on an offshore wind job. And I think that's a good model. However, not the same can be said for solar projects, even utility scale, and onshore wind as well. So I think, to make this a true just transition, a true roadmap that incorporates all the above energy approach, there needs to be a strong role for natural gas as we transition. There needs to be strong labor standards and training and apprenticeship that applies to the renewable energy sector, and to make sure that we're not creating, jobs that are basically low wage, low skilled jobs, and that's our fear that's happening as we speak. So especially in a sector that's going to have to be heavily incentivized for a long period of time until it becomes cost effective. So we want to see strong labor standards. We want to be a willing partner. We want to support this. We're involved in all aspects of energy construction, from pipelines to offshore wind, but we want to make sure that we're raising the standards so that this just transition not only works for our environment, but works for the working men and women of Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we're going to go to Susan Mcphee. I've asked you to unmute.
Hi, yes. First, thank you very much for your time. I want to introduce myself. I'm Susan Mcphee. I'm an energy conservation coordinator working with the cities and towns of Malden, Waltham, Winchester, Woburn, and Stoneham. I have 3 brief points I'd like to make. First, I think in Judy's comments that you were right on target in terms of replacements. Every replacement is an opportunity, whether it's for a city or a town or a resident. And I think that that's a mindset that the plan should try to address so that people know it's not just a part for part replacement, because we're kind of working against everybody's, it's what everybody's always done. When the thing in the basement fails, you just go and get another one. So I think that that's a real mindset shift. I would give you the example of the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, has said that, and people can just tell you, people talk about it, they're going to install 100,000 air source heat pumps by 2025. That's her goal. And so people are saying, well, what is that? So when the thing breaks, then they're talking about it. So I think we need somebody as visible as the governor to say, hey, we're going to do this, whatever it is, whether it's air source heat pumps or EVs, or, there needs to be visibility, simple goals. When you replace something, that's when you act. My second point is in terms of getting this sort of work done, you made the point about all the deep energy retrofits for our existing building stock. Working in municipalities, we have a real challenge with the PECs, that they are not necessarily up to speed on what that means. They're not up to speed on electrification. There aren't enough people to help with air source heat pumps. And the incentives on air source heat pumps have been all over the place. It would be great if we could have a pretty simple and generous way to do fuel switching when we're trying to get air source heat pumps into all of our old, tough buildings. And last but not least, on EV charging, the utilities are basically going to be taking over for all the big oil companies. That's a huge revenue stream. It's a huge change in market share. At this stage, all of the EV chargers that we're putting in through the Make Ready program are essentially invisible. So if you are a working class family in one of my cities or towns, you're driving by chargers every day, but you would never know it. We need to require wayfinding signs to go along with EV chargers, so that when you're ready to replace that, and there's that word of replacement again, when you're ready to replace that fossil fuel vehicle, you are thinking, wait a minute, I've been seeing all these signs for EV chargers. They are here. I will test drive an electric vehicle. Because I think right now, again, people would just do part per part replacement because they don't see signage for all of the EV chargers that we've put in. Those are my comments. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you so much. We're gonna go next to Connor Dolan. I've asked you to unmute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Connor.
All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide some brief comments. I'm the Director of External Affairs for the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association. We're the National Trade Association for the fuel cell and hydrogen industry. We'll be submitting some extensive written comments and are still forming them, but just some high-level points I'd like to just raise. On the transportation side, we would highly recommend that this plan be inclusive of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for light, medium, and heavy duty transportation. I know there's a footnote where it says fuel cell vehicles are not considered EVs for the purposes of this document, and we think that that is a concern, as it would be effectively picking winners and losers for the zero emission vehicle space. We believe that parity is really important, and that all zero emission vehicles should be included as necessary components of this plan, particularly as there could be funding opportunities and grant programs developed as part of this that could enable broader disparities between these markets. We also encourage that as a Class 1 renewable, that stationary fuel cell systems be incorporated in the electricity generation and energy supply recommendations in this plan, and that those be given appropriate due inclusion. Fuel cells have a tremendously high capacity and can help really provide large-scale, long-term hydrogen energy storage, as well as power generation to help expand decarbonization on the electric grid. We also encourage the use of hydrogen production with the offshore wind developments that are planned as part of this effort. There's a huge opportunity there, and there's a number of existing projects and plans abroad, particularly in Europe, to extensively use wind to hydrogen opportunities. And finally, I just want to say that we think that hydrogen has a tremendous role that can be played within heating and fuel blending strategies B2 and B3.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go with Peter Dunbeck. I'm asking you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. I'm Peter Dunbeck. I'm with Sustainable Westboro, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a municipality that is working hard to try to help the state achieve its long-term goals. And I think there's various mentions within the plan around the importance of municipal efforts. And as we work with other Metro West area communities, we're not feeling a very strong direct connection to the state initiatives. And we're encouraging that in the update to the plan that there are new efforts to reach out to municipal governments and advocates who are working within the communities to create a municipal advisory council of some sort that would be available on an ongoing basis as we jointly try to navigate towards these long-term goals. Beyond that communication link, I think there's funding needed to help the state, the municipal governments in regard to putting in place staffing and at basic administration level of helping the communities through this transition, as well as technical services as new technologies like heat pumps and deep energy retrofits are needed in every building within a community. That's way beyond the skills of a municipal government. And I think that the state could help themselves achieve the statewide goal by helping the municipalities with technical services such as that. Finally, I'd like to say that as we have municipal engagements and local goals for reaching net zero by 2050, there is very little data available to us. MAPC has developed a very useful tool, but the data in that underneath that tool is not timely and not granular enough to allow to guide the municipal effort to actually achieve the goals that we share. So we're very supportive of the initiative here at the state level, and would look forward to municipal state partnership to achieve this goal.
Great, thank you so much. We're gonna go to Fred, but before Fred begins, just want to ask those who did pre-register to provide oral comments. If you don't have your hand raised, that would be great if you can raise your hand so I know that you're ready to speak when I do call on you. All right, go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. My name is Fred Davis, and I also want to say how much I appreciate and I'm proud to be living in Massachusetts with this leading program that the state has come out with. And from my point of view, we're talking about an initiative that is not quite powerful enough. Certainly, we're talking about a major transition, and I want to point out that there are many of us, as Peter just said, at the community level, statewide, who are ready and willing to help effect the transition. And I also want to make a comment that when transitions are done well, they can generally increase prosperity. I've been involved 40 years in energy efficiency, and I've seen that happen over and over. There are concerns beforehand. It's a major transition, and there's a lot of winning afterwards. I'm sorry to use that phrase, but that's the case. I appreciate the concerns. I don't mean to diminish them. But acceleration is my major comment here. Acceleration, given the need for massive electrification of households, homes, and automobiles in particular, I don't see the major motivation there. I don't hear the messaging, as was mentioned before by Susan Mcphee. And I think that messaging and major proclamations need to be happening today, tomorrow, and the next day in order for the ramp to look like what it needs to look like. My rough calculations, given the documents, were that we're talking about a factor of about 3x, 3 times. In other words, the rate of change that we saw up to 2017 needs to increase by 3 times for the period 2017 to 2030. Since we're already 3 or 4 years into that period, that 3x rate is very conservative. So we need a major ramp up. We need a picture of that ramp. We need action happening. And I am really looking for what's happening this year, what's happening next year, so that the right number of people are getting on board this year or getting on board now. And that number will increase year over year to get to where it needs to be in 8, 9 years. That's my major comment. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. We're gonna go to Margaret Eckhart. I have asked you to unmute.
Yes, I just did. I am an architect, registered architect in Massachusetts, and some of my comments have already been covered. I have read the report and found that public transportation was not emphasized very much. I also wondered exactly how smart growth would be implemented. I think it's a great idea. I love the idea of smart growth, but I didn't see a lot of detail on those things. You know, making more cars that are electric doesn't seem like the best solution. Reducing miles traveled would be better. Also, I had some thoughts about the building sector, and I'm aware of some language that has been drafted called the EASY Code, and I just want to speak in support of that language. The idea is that in order for buildings to be net zero, you have to make them very, very efficient and not use a lot of energy before you start thinking of balancing that with the renewables that are needed. I would love to see solar panels mandatory on every building before we have to go cutting down trees to put solar panels on the ground. So that's it. Thank you. It's a great, it's really a great report.
Great, thank you so much, Margaret. Next up, we have Glenn Ager. I'm asking you to unmute.
Yeah, it's Glenn Ayers, and thank you very much. I'm with the Partnership for Policy Integrity. And a couple of points that I would really like to make, and I'll follow this up with some written comments, and that is that there are some serious inconsistencies, and I understand, you know, the decarbonization part and the roadmap and wanting to get to net zero, but at the same time, the same agencies are proposing to roll back the very hard fought and won RPS standards to include dirty biomass energy, which is a high carbon emitting fuel source, and include that into the clean energy standards and incentivize the chopping down of our forests to burn, both for electric generation and under the alternative portfolio standard for thermal heat generation. And so we have this inconsistency in your planning where on the one part you're saying how great forests are and how important planting urban forests are. And at the same time, we're incentivizing chopping down our forests, especially looking at our state-owned public forests, which are subject to tens of thousands of acres of clear cutting right now. And that's being done by the Department of Conservation and Recreation throughout the watershed lands, the Quabbin watershed and the Wachusett and Ware River watersheds, and also the lands that are managed by the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. All of those entities are chopping down the exact forests that you're claiming we're going to have to be protecting in order to get to net zero. So I wish that we would look at these inconsistencies and see how they're affecting our forests, how they're affecting our communities, especially looking at the Springfield biomass plant, which is located in an environmental justice community with the highest asthma levels in the nation. And these policies being set are incentivizing the continued destruction of our forests and the reduction in our public health. So please take a close look at that. The parts of the plan, other parts of the plan are great, but those parts are severely lacking and really need to be revised so that they take into consideration exactly what you're talking about, really protecting forests so that the existing forests that we have now will be able to increase the amount of carbon they're storing over the next 30-year period so that we can get to net zero We can't get there if we chop our trees down now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. We're gonna go next to Joel Etter. Can you?
Thank you.
Great.
My name is Joel Etter. I'm the president of the Northeast Hearth, Patio, and Barbecue Association. I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment today. The Northeast Hearth, Patio, and Barbecue Association is a trade association representing over 300 individual members of retail and related companies throughout the Northeast. These are regions chimney sweeps, installers, maintenance companies, and any other entity having commercial interest in the hearth, patio, and barbecue industry. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have over 50 members, companies supporting 350 families, and the vast majority of these independent mom and pop shops. NEPA, which is Northeast Hearth, Patio, and Barbecue Association, recognizes the changing landscape of energy and fossil fuel industry. We're committed to working with government officials and regulators at all levels to increase access to more sustainable and climate-centric fuel sources throughout our homes and businesses. However, moving immediately to net zero model could result in skyrocketing electric rates and potentially inhibit access to more affordable sources of fuel and power, negatively impacting small businesses. NEPA members would like to make the following comments to the plan. Regarding the CECP claim on population growth in Massachusetts, Massachusetts presently has a negative migration, with commercial real estate vacancies in Boston being highest in the country for the first time in history. The 2017 population statistic is irrelevant in 2021. However, according to the Pioneer Institute Public Policy Report, over time, the migration has significantly affected not only the growth, but also the population. And at one point in the 50,000 Massachusetts residents moved to other states. NEP is concerned with the getting to 45 by 2030, which is in the public building sector. The kind of urgency immediately will drive up our housing costs. Recently, the New Jersey Builders Association studied the impact of the state's net zero energy plan of new single housing construction. The total added cost, excluding electrical vehicle charging, to construct a typical single family home was more than $83,500. These cost increases do not account for increased electric costs as a result of grid transmission and new upgraded distribution infrastructure. NEP is concerned with your information on heat pumps. The optimal temperature for using heat pumps is 25 to 30 degrees. Heat pumps will lose efficiency once the temperature goes below 30 degrees.
I would like to ask you to wrap up in the next 5 seconds if possible.
Yep. All set. Just thank you for your consideration of our comments, and we'll send in some written comments as well. And we strongly urge to continue engagement with the Executive Office of Energy and Environment Affairs and to mitigate these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is Tom Amuro.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, Tom.
Hey, very good. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm a member of ECA and Chelmsford Climate Action Team. And I have no doubt that it's very important for us to electrify transportation and heating. And in that effort, I already have 2 EVs and 4 air source mini split heat pumps. But that has skyrocketed my electricity consumption. And in Massachusetts, it's very expensive. And I've chosen the 100% green option in my municipal aggregation program. So it's 26 cents per kilowatt right now. But one way for a homeowner to reduce costs is to maximize their residential wind and solar electric generation. And the vertical access wind turbines look very promising. And currently there's a cap of 10 kilowatts per annum on production of a private residential system. And what I'd like to really exhort is that we need to increase the cap, or actually remove it altogether, so homeowners can have wind and solar systems under net metering, contributing clean electricity to the grid. It's kind of like a civic duty for as many of us as possible to produce the clean energy we're going to need to achieve net zero by 2050. And if I still have a little bit more time, one other thing, and also you talked about replacement, but when you're building a brand new house, it really hurts to see that almost 100% of them are being built with roofs that aren't going to support or optimize solar production, solar panels. The roof lines are interfering with the, and they're not oriented towards the sun, southern exposure. It'd be so easy to just, build houses that can be used to produce electricity. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. We're gonna go to Mark Scribner. I apologize if I butchered your last name.
It's Scribner.
Scribner. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Two critical actions are missing from the plan's transportation strategy T5 action: market facilitation that would be required in order to accelerate EV adoption to the level needed to meet the plan's goal of 750,000 EVs by 2030. These are marketing, which is often referred to as awareness and outreach, and driver support, which is akin to customer service and technology transition support that many organizations now provide. In 2020, my organization, Energy New England, conducted the largest survey of its kind to electric vehicle interest by Massachusetts residents, which received nearly 8,000 responses from 10 municipalities across the state. Respondents were asked about their likelihood to consider an EV for the next vehicle, what year they were likely to purchase, what factors influenced their decision, and what outstanding barriers would prevent them from choosing an EV. And summary slides of this survey's aggregate results are available upon request. The results were encouraging, indicating over 1/3 of respondents may consider an EV by 2030, but it became clear that significantly more market facilitation actions will be needed than is set forth in the current plan. The first indicator of that is that over 35% of the interested respondents were not sure which type of plug-in vehicle was right for them. This creates a significant consumer hesitancy barrier that slows any new technology adoption. By comparison, only 15 to 24% knew what type of EV was right for them. So this gap in consumer knowledge is best bridged through that active outreach, marketing and engagement and campaign, and also driver support services would provide. Some more key findings were over half of respondents were interested in the financial savings, whereas less than half were interested in emissions benefits. So the focus of marketing needs to be on the savings from fuel, maintenance, and the cost of ownership. Other concerns addressed were about new technology, was about 1/3 of the respondents. And also 1 in 5 thought there was no vehicle choice available to them, what they were looking for, another unaddressed area. Secondary insights included that while 40% were concerned about charging access, over half of those respondents actually live in a single family home, indicating that they didn't even know that they actually already had a place to charge their EV. So, and finally, a very concerning finding was that EV interest through 2025 will actually be higher than in the second half of this decade, which is opposite to what most of the projections are showing. And this indicating that one of the greatest challenges is going to lie with the potential secondary wave of adopters following this immediate one. So all of this evidence shows that comprehensive state-sponsored marketing campaigns and driver support are really going to be needed, especially in the second half of this decade. So in summary, that's what the findings support, and that actively engaging residents with a call to action are critical steps to help residents choose a next vehicle. And the second missing key element, driver support, will provide effective, direct, one-on-one education and reinsurance. This could be through such as a state-sponsored e-visor coaching service.
Can you please wrap up in 5 seconds or less?
Sure. And so these key strategy actions of EV marketing and driver support are critical to meeting these plans' metrics for 2030 and beyond. And you can contact me directly if you'd like more details about this comment or to see a summary of the slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to Michael Ferrante.
Thank you.
I can, yes.
Great. I work for the Massachusetts Energy Marketers Association, which is a trade association, heating oil, liquid biofuel, propane, and actually heat pump technology installers. We'd like to make a couple of comments today on the plan with respect to some things that we believe the plan is omitted. I actually worked with David Ismay for over a year on trying to position our industry. We've had a strong commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions here with the use of liquid biofuel. I personally have been working on that project for over 15 years. I guess I would just say that it's very important for the state to re-examine the 2008 biofuel mandate, which was never implemented by last DOER. In doing so, the state could effectively cut carbon emissions right immediately with home heating and transportation vehicles. And that law should really be fully looked at again and reinstalled almost immediately.
Just want to let you know that your audio is not very crisp.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Bad connection. Why don't I just choose to submit written comments to you?
Thank you, Michael. I think it was not clear enough to have captured them orally. So please do submit them in writing. Unfortunately, yeah, the commentary was not clear.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, Michael. We're gonna go next to Gia Neswald.
Hi, I'm with Wendell State Forest Alliance. Thank you. Claire and Han, you've been great over the years, and I recognize Undersecretary Chang. Thank you for your presentation. We were with you through the roadmap public comments process as well, and we heard from Han that the ultimate product of the roadmap process would include a no-cut scenario. That was not done. And so I'd like to point out that the results of the study that are now being incorporated into policy are pre-weighted. As indicated in the land sector report, carbon storage in our, I'm just making sure I'm being clear here, in trees throughout the state, could increase by 49% from now until 2050. The estimates for sequestration in the science-based study are 5.5 million metric tons to 9.2. And so one question, I know we're not allowed to ask questions, but one concern we have is why is only the lower number being figured in here? Forests are being undervalued by nearly half of their capacity to sequester and store carbon. Forest cutting throughout the state costs us between 13 and 16 million metric tons of storage. And long life wood products only capture a small fraction of that. Also, what is not being taken into consideration is the loss of future sequestration to the tune of up to 9.2 million metric tons per year. So none of this is being calculated in properly. The only thing we're hearing is 5.5 million metric tons of sequestration per year, when again, that could be almost doubled. And then there's mention in the science and land sector report, science-based report, that soil carbon due to development could be costing us, I'm rounding off, 11 to 14 million metric tons of carbon equivalent per annum. So that all needs to be considered in the policy making. And I ask that the land sector section 6 be rewritten with proper accounting and consideration of all the numbers that are put forth in the scientific report. I do need to turn to one more topic, which is that what's happening here today was postponed on January 28th, 2 minutes before it was scheduled to take place. 10 minutes later, I was communicating with Claire by email asking that the public comment deadline would be extended to 22 days after the rescheduled webinar, the latter of the two rescheduled webinars. And then we heard nothing until March 3rd, 2 days after Wendell State Forest Alliance inquired again as to when these webinars were going to take place. And now we're being given a presentation that is, of course, it's a lot to take on, but that is not going into great depth, and we are being barred from asking questions. So I object to not being allowed to ask questions and have an exchange, and my request is that the deadline be extended to March 31st, which would be in accordance with the original proportions, 22 days after the last webinar.
Thank you, Gia. I apologize. Just want to make sure that we can get to Alan Fierce, who's been holding on. So apologies. We're going to move on to Alan. And then for those who registered and noted that you would like to provide comments, but you didn't raise your hands, feel free to do that now, and we'll try to comment as many as possible. Go ahead, Ellen. Oh boy. Can you hear me, Ellen?
Hi, Han. I'm sorry. Just want to join the chorus of people thanking you and the team for all you guys have been doing. And I know it's been a tremendous amount of work. However, I also want to join the smaller chorus of people who are very frustrated that we can't ask questions, because I have some that are really fundamental to what I might comment on by March 29th, or whether I would even comment. And it has to do with the fact that the elephant in the room right now is the legislation that is pending up on Beacon Hill that potentially may change what the state's goal for 2030 is. Your goal, a 45% reduction from the base 1990, is in the CECP, and all of the particular goals for transportation and housing and electricity are based on that. If the legislation passes, it will be moving to 50%, or maybe it'll be something in between. I know that there have been negotiations between your office and the legislature. Right now, that question is completely undecided. If it is, at the end of the day, a 50% goal, that's a huge change for the CECP. You would be dropping emissions by an additional, in the next decade, have to drop emissions by an additional 25% if you do the math. That would call for rewriting of this CECP. So I am sitting here wondering what I am supposed to do. If between now and March 20, whatever it is, 22nd, 29th, legislation comes out and sets a different goal for 2030, will you be rewriting the CEP first before I go to all the work to submit my comments? I sure would like to know the answer to that question. Let me quickly throw in a real comment. Okay, a real comment. I have an electric vehicle, but everyone I know who's low or moderate income does not. They can't afford one. All you have in there, I am sure, is incentives for EVs. I would like to see something for lower and moderate income people who have older model internal combustion engine cars, a buyback program for them. This would cost some money, but it would get those older cars off the road and give some money to people who perhaps can't recover a tax exemption or a tax credit, and allow them perhaps to buy a used EV so that we can move that portion of the population forward electrically as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. We have 2 more hands, so just trying to get through these folks as fast as we can. Jamie Jackward, can you? Oh, geez, I didn't mean to. Uh-oh.
Check 1, 2.
Yes, now I can hear you. Go ahead, Jamie.
Excellent. Hung, thank you very much. Undersecretary Chang, congratulations to you and your team for a comprehensive and well-researched document. I work at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Together with our sister campuses, we've all been entertaining energy master plans, looking at how to decarbonize our own physical plants around heating and cooling. These are comprehensive plans looking at trying to reduce and eliminate the use of all fossil fuels. We've been practicing for the last 14 years an incremental approach to trying to make things as efficient as we possibly can to make those reductions to hit our long-term 80% reduction goals. And we realized that through these incremental changes, we're never going to get there, that it's going to take transformational change. And I think that that's the essence that I would like to share with this group, is that I hear a lot of small incremental changes in what you're trying to do when we need to be bold. This is our Mars shot where we're going to go and return from Mars. It's our chance to be bold. Having a stretch code is lovely, but it's not going to do it for a building that we're going to have operating for the next 100 years. If we're building a new building today, that has to be built to passive house standards. I disagree with one of the earlier commenters on the dollar volume. I'm not sure, I haven't had the chance to read the research he was quoting, but the research that I've seen says that it's a fraction of those costs, especially when looked at over the energy savings that are going to be accomplished during the lifetime of that building. So that's a lot of carbon that we have to really be concerned about. I think in general, we're trying to be aspirational with what we're looking at. What I see in this document is that you've got achievable things if we try to continue with the sort of status quo. And I just don't think it's going to get there. I would really encourage us to immediately eliminate subsidies for fossil fuel rather than slowly get rid of them over time. I think we need to more actively promote our public transportation, things like dedicated bus lanes that you've seen during the pandemic and free ridership within communities that have shown that that's the way that we're going to transition more riders over to get them out of single occupancy vehicles. Great work thus far, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you so much. And we're gonna go to the last person on my list here with their hands up, Lenore Brick.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your good efforts. This is a gigantic job before us. And I want to echo the person who just spoke before me in that bold is the way to go, because actually what we're talking about is giant system change. We made up these systems that we live in, and now we're trapped in them. And along with that, people whose livelihoods depend on the systems that we created are feeling very threatened, as always. In every one of these situations that I'm in, I'm always the pushback, understandably so, is by people whose livelihood depends on the industries that we need to change. And so firstly, that transition, that funding, that retraining, that re-educating has to be part of whatever plan that we do. And I'm looking at in my the work that I do, I'm looking at the land sector. This, of course, involves the energy sectors and everything we talked about, but the land sector is needs a lot more expansion, because the other sectors, I think, are better researched and maybe better informed. And I think that we need to bring in the latest in forest ecology science, not just forestry, because a lot of that is not the latest that we understand, not just about carbon sequestration, but other eco-services that forests provide. And we have this way of thinking about things, human beings, we reduce it, we use arithmetic. Even carbon sequestration and using carbon metrics is not enough of an understanding of the complex natural systems that we need to look at. The reason we have climate change is because we are out of sync with nature. This is just a symptom of what's happened. And in order to get back in sync with nature, we need to create systems that honor what nature does. So someone talked about the inconsistencies with biomass. Someone talked about the forced mythical choice between solar versus trees. These are all ways in which we need to look at what we're doing with forests. I suggest you look at the work of Dr. Bill Muma and Susan Massino, who wrote about proforestation, which is old growth forests intact, not just to sequester carbon, but all of the things that forests do for us. We have this misunderstanding that climate change produces floods and droughts when actually it's a vicious circle going back and forth. And it's forests and protected lands that take care of that. There's nothing in the land sector about the agricultural emissions or the agricultural system or the food systems or the poor soil health or the overdevelopment that has taken away the ability of the land to heal itself. And so I think that all needs to be understood a little more deeply than we have been looking at. And that is not just the fault of legislators and policymakers. It's also the climate movement has really not been looking at natural systems in its whole holistic way of understanding. So I see that I'm supposed to conclude.
Yes, please.
I will follow up with written comments. I thank you for your work, and I hope that we understand that this is something that the states can't do alone, the regions can't do alone. This is a federal plan that we need, and I hope that the states will appeal to the federal government in addition to what we can do on the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. We have John here who did pre-register. Thank you for raising your hand to know that you're ready to speak.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to second the comments of Leonore Brick, Jamie Jockhart, Alan Fierce, Glenn Ayers, and Gina Neswall. I think we all have to remember that a live tree sucks up carbon dioxide, a dead tree does not. So we need to stop logging. I mean, and compensate the people whose livelihoods depend on logging with the incentives that we now give them to support the biofuel industry. Thanks. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. And thank you for those who hung on for the extra 9 minutes. Claire put in the chat the phone number that you could call if you would like to provide or comments. Actually, I apologize. There are 2 phone call listeners. If anyone is interested in providing comments that you haven't had a chance to provide comments, I think you can press *9 to raise your hand. I'll hang on for another 5 seconds in case the phone.
In the meantime, I just want to chime in and say thank you very much for everybody who were willing to speak up today. I thought it was extremely informative to hear what people are thinking about. We do apologize for not able to have sort of live question and answer. We had to make a choice about listening to everyone and make sure we have sufficient amount of time for people to chime in, as well as answer questions. But just know that we take your comments and questions seriously, and we will definitely consider that. For the gentleman that asked about legislation, I understand it must be frustrating. We are obviously, engaged in the discussion with the members of House and Senate, and we don't know exactly when that will be complete. So we are planning to complete the CECP still in April, but of course, if there certain things change that plan, then we must take those into consideration. So I share your concern, but we understand the implications of the potential changes that legislation might impose, and we will need to adjust our course accordingly when that happens.
Great, thank you, Judy. It looks like we have one final hand, so I'm gonna call on Sally, and it looks like you're already unmuted, so go ahead and jump in, and then I think that will be our last comment, and we'll end for the evening.
Yes, hi Claire. We've been corresponding. So thank you for all of you for your hard work on this. And I'm wearing a number of different hats. I professionally consult with homeowners on energy efficiency, renewable energy, have done so for at least 10 years. I'm on the Town Energy Committee and have been for at least 10 years, and also am part of a climate action now in Western Mass, which is working on climate legislation and policy advocacy. So wearing all of those hats, but not officially. The only one I'm wearing, I guess, officially is my own. I wanted to, first of all, echo what Stacy Rubin of Conservation Law Foundation said, that it's really key to make sure that environmental justice communities who are most affected by the long-term impacts of fossil fuel emissions benefit the most from incentives and programs from this plan, and that they have solid representation at the table during planning and policy development and implementation of these programs, so that they're appropriate and are able to reach members of their communities and maybe different cultures and so forth. I have a concern about the plan not mentioning the phasing out of hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, in air source heat pumps, and mini splits are a type of those. I know that the new state plan phases it out in other refrigerant applications and spray foam, but the state is going to be pushing rightly for electrification of heating and cooling through heat pumps. And so we need to look at addressing how will HFCs be phased out, and the companies that make these mini splits and air source heat pumps are not going to phase them out unless the state makes it mandatory, according to a colleague who has talked to them directly about this. I want to urge that building emission targets include the embodied greenhouse gas emissions and materials, including HFCs and concrete, that can far outweigh the emission savings over time from operations. Two more things. Solar development should be prevented from destroying state forests in the state and replacing them with PV with solar. Right now, towns that are in the green communities are in a legal situation where we're not allowed to prevent that from happening, because we're required by the Green Communities Act to allow solar. So that needs to be looked at more closely. And lastly, I'd like to see some specific wording that TCI, the transportation, TCI, whatever it is, TCI should focus its more than 35% of its funds on environmental justice communities, and that money be designated from TCI for transportation related programs only, and so it doesn't go into a general fund for the Massachusetts budget. And one of the ways to reduce vehicle miles traveled, thinking outside the direct transportation box, is expanding broadband in urban areas that don't have good broadband. In rural areas like where I live, where there are places where they're still on dial-up, unbelievably, that will give people access to all sorts of opportunities, working, education, healthcare, online, where they won't have to travel, which during the pandemic, we've obviously figured out that we can do a lot of that. So thank you for your time, and appreciate this webinar.
Thank you, Sally. With that, I think we've made it through all of the comments, so I appreciate folks for hanging on into overtime, although I'm pleasantly surprised that we're only this many minutes over time. Judy, if you have any closing words, I'll pass it back to you.
Again, thank you very much, everyone, for participating. We are going to have same format next Monday evening. Thank you.